All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really incredible, highly dynamic relationship from the Gospel of Matthew. We're going to track this fascinating psychological journey, watching how the Apostle Peter moved from a place of absolute trembling reverence to dangerously overstepping his bounds with his master. We're looking at that shifting dynamic between Peter and Jesus, and how a relationship built on awe can sometimes blur into, well, a pretty unhealthy familiarity.
So, what happens when you get too comfortable with your heroes or mentors? I bet a lot of us have faced this in the workplace or just in life. What happens when those boundaries start to blur? When you work really closely with a mentor or a leader you deeply admire, that initial awe can eventually wear off. You get close, you get comfortable, and sometimes you cross a line. This isn't just some modern workplace dilemma, it's exactly the psychological journey we see Peter take with Jesus right in the biblical text.
So we're going to map out Peter's relational arc across 4 specific chapters in Matthew, starting with awe in chapter 14, slipping into familiarity in 15, the massive clash in 16, and finally, reconciliation in chapter 18.
Let's start with stage 1, the baseline of awe, which we establish in Matthew chapter 14. Now we meet Peter earlier in the gospel leaving his nets to follow Jesus, but a pivotal moment of pure awe happens right in the middle of this massive storm on the sea. Peter literally calls out, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And get this, he actually gets out of the boat. He takes this incredible step of faith. But then, seeing the wind, he gets completely terrified. He starts to sink and cries out for Jesus to save him. And Jesus immediately stretches out his hand, grabs hold of him, and asks why he doubted. The second they step back into that boat, the wind just stops dead. And look at the posture of the guys in the boat. The text tells us they worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's son." The immediate result for Peter, and really the whole boat, is pure, unadulterated awe. I mean, they perfectly understand the hierarchy here, right? Jesus is the master, and they are the astonished students.
Which brings us to stage 2, slipping into familiarity, moving right into Matthew chapter 15.
So, just one chapter later, Jesus teaches this controversial parable, explaining that it isn't what enters the mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of it. When Peter asks for clarity, notice the grammar in his request. He says, "Explain the parable to us." Check out the tense here. It's the imperative tense. Peter isn't just politely raising his hand in the back of the class to ask a question. Grammatically speaking, he is issuing a command. And sure, while the imperative in ancient texts can sometimes just show intensity, the shift here is palpable. Peter is moving from this trembling awe in a storm to a really bold, almost demanding familiarity.
And that boils over in stage 3, crossing the line. The tension completely peaks in Matthew chapter 16.
So Jesus has just plainly predicted his impending suffering, rejection, and death. And Mark's gospel actually gives us the physical staging for Peter's reaction, which is wild. Picture the scene. Jesus is facing forward, with his disciples behind him, and Peter takes him aside. He literally steps right in front of Jesus, becoming this physical obstacle, blocking his path just to issue a correction to his own master. He crosses a massive boundary here.
If you compare the modern NASB translation with Young's literal translation, it brilliantly captures the Greek idiom of Peter's motivation. The NASB reads, "God forbid it, Lord. This shall never happen to you." But Young's literal translation captures it like this, "Be kind to yourself, sir. This shall not be to thee." Peter is entirely motivated by carnal concern. It's like that fierce protective love that makes a family try to stop their kid from leaving a safe life to go serve the Lord or enlist in the military. Peter's familiarity has led him to way overstep his influence, basically trying to take Jesus out of his divine mission just to keep him safe.
Let's actually put a linguistic spotlight on exactly what Peter does next. The text says Peter began to rebuke him. The heavy Greek word used here is epitomao. It means to express strong disapproval of someone, to rebuke or denounce. Let me tell you, this is a very strong, highly aggressive word.
To really get the absolute shock value of Peter using this word on Jesus, look at what Jesus normally uses this powerful word against. In the Gospels, Jesus uses epithemio to rebuke the raging winds in the sea. He uses it to violently cast out unclean spirits and demons. He even uses it to rebuke the spiritual forces behind severe fevers. And here is Peter, the student, using this exact same word of supreme authority to denounce the Son of God. Unbelievable, right?
Well, Jesus absolutely does not let this slide. He immediately turns his back on Peter, faces the rest of the disciples, and returns Peter's rebuke with an even stronger one, instantly checking that massive overstepping of authority. He says, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's." Peter had literally become an obstacle in Jesus' path, viewing the whole situation from a purely human, carnal perspective rather than God's.
So let's look at stage 4, the limits of forgiveness, and how they find grace in Matthew chapter 18.
Seriously, how do you even come back from being called Satan by your master? Well, in chapter 18, Jesus is teaching about personal boundaries and offenses. He says if your brother sins, go and show him his fault in private. He's establishing that we aren't meant to be the sin police for the whole world, but rather, we're responsible for handling personal offenses right within our immediate community. Interestingly enough, when Luke's gospel records this same teaching about showing a brother his fault, it uses that exact same word we just learned, epitimao, to say rebuke him. You can tell Peter is listening super closely here, and he clearly understands that Jesus is talking about personal boundaries and offenses. He steps up to seek clarity, asking, "Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times?" Notice the tone change here. The commanding imperative is completely gone. The audacious rebukes, gone. Peter has totally shifted his tone back to that of a humble, seeking student. He is asking about the limits of grace.
And Jesus just drops this staggering number on him. He says, "I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Jesus then uses this parable of a king settling accounts to teach Peter a really vital lesson. After all the boundary crossing, the overfamiliarity, and those harsh rebukes, their relationship, and in fact all relationships in the kingdom of heaven, must be rooted in limitless, expansive grace.
As we wrap up this explainer today, I really want you to think about this arc Peter traveled. Reflect on your own boundaries. When you get close to mentors, leaders, or loved ones, do you slip into a carnal familiarity that oversteps? What is your personal capacity for forgiveness when boundaries are crossed against you? How do you manage that really delicate tension between familiarity and respect in your own life? It's a challenging thought to leave you with for sure, but an absolutely essential one for navigating our most important relationships.